What's up, people? We have Matt versus Japan. He is here to tell us why he is taking on Japan in a showdown. Matt versus Japan, the heavyweight. Just kidding, guys. He's a really cool guy who has taken language learning incredibly seriously, and that's why, of course, we are here on Go Learning Languages to talk with the great Matt versus Japan. Matt, what's up?
Hey, thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah. All right. So, listen, I won't do too much of your intro because it's going to be important for people to know, and most people here, I think, interested in languages will already know who you are. But maybe you can just give us a little idea of who you are and why you are Matt versus Japan.
Yeah, well, so I got really into learning Japanese when I was a high schooler. Had never really been interested in languages up until that point. Just, I was kind of into anime, and it just hit me like I've said before, it just kind of hit me like a strike of lightning or something. I just woke up one day and I wanted to learn Japanese and I wanted to get really good. And so at first I didn't know how to go about learning a language. So I kind of tried different things, like normal things like textbooks and going to classes at my high school. It didn't really get me good results. And it was when I took on this pretty extreme method of trying to immerse myself in Japanese media as close to 24 hours a day as I could, constantly listening to Japanese, watching Japanese movies, reading Japanese books. It was when I started taking this type of approach that I started to see really fast results. And so I kind of lived this all Japanese, all the time lifestyle for close to 5 years. Part of that I lived in Japan for about 6 months, but for most of it, I was actually in the US. When I went to college, there were a lot of Japanese exchange students there. So I would kind of hang out with them. I was like the one not Japanese guy in their Japanese group of friends. So that got me a lot of speaking practice and things like that. And, through this method, I was able to reach what most people consider to be a pretty impressive level of Japanese, mostly while being inside of the United States. So on my YouTube channel, Matt vs. Japan, I teach people how they can replicate my experience and do the same.
That's awesome. It's especially cool on top of it, and we're going to delve right into that because I as well have learned a few of my languages outside of the country. As a matter of fact, I've spent only 5 days or so in Italy, maybe 6 at best, and same like you, I just kind of had that strike, that pull, something inside of you that just said you have to learn this and you have to do it. And that's an important factor, I think, for someone who wants to learn a language. You have to have that pull, otherwise it's very easy to give up. So let's just get straight into it, because I think people are going to want to know some of these gems from you trying to put yourself and immerse yourself. What does that mean? A whole lot of people come up to me and say, well, you lived in Croatia for a really long time. It's just easy. They'll say something about an excuse, like, I haven't learned that language because I haven't moved to that country. If I moved there, I would just learn it. And is that true? Have you found that to be the case, that you just kind of like, oh, I just live my normal life and the language just sucks in?
I think that idea that to immerse yourself in the language, or just to really get good at a language, you need to live in the country. You need to be in an environment where everyone speaks that language. I think it's one of the biggest myths in language learning. And like you said, I think it's a big excuse. And it goes both ways, right? There's people like the two of us who've learned a language outside of the country, so we know it's possible. And on the other hand, there's a lot of people who go to Japan and they don't learn Japanese because they end up, hanging out with other foreigners, other people from their same country, because, you can't really make friends with locals very easily when there's no language that you guys share to communicate. So you end up hanging out with people who speak your native language, and before you know, it's been 5-10 years and you only know 3 words of Japanese. I've seen so many people fall into that pattern. So yeah, it's really up to you to take the initiative to put the language into your environment, to put your phone in the language, to start watching movies in the language, to, listen to podcasts in the language. You have to make that happen. And regardless of your physical environment, the actions you need to take are pretty much the same.
So essentially what you've got, and what I've seen on Refold, which is your website, and you're going to talk a whole lot more about as well, is that it's this path to fluency. So more or less 100 days. I saw you have Spanish on there. Japanese is obviously coming. Something else is coming too, as well.
I think we got Korean lined up next.
Korean is lined up. Like, so what does that look like? If you can give us a preview for these people who are just like, all right, this is cool. I'm intrigued. You guys have piqued my interest. Where do they go? If we could go to day one, what are you telling someone to do from that first initial idea?
Yeah, well, so basically the very first thing you do is something pretty basic. You start off learning the most common words in the language and starting to learn the basics of the grammar. Because although it's possible to learn like an infant, like when we were infants, we didn't learn vocabulary or grammar. Our moms didn't give us flashcards or anything. Of course, we just picked it up naturally. You can try to do that, but it's going to be a lot slower. because as an adult, or someone who already is fluent in at least one language, we have all these different concepts that we already know. And so we already know what a table is. So rather than trying to like refigure out what a table is from scratch, someone just kind of tells you like, oh, well, the way to say table in this language is X. You can pick things up a lot more quickly in the beginning. So I think it's really effective to just learn the most common 1,000 words in the language. That will give you a really good starting point. And then learn a little basics of the grammar. Not too much. I think a lot of people, since we're so used to learning in school and try to grasp everything, intellectually with our conscious mind so we can pass a test, people try to take that mindset into language learning and think that they're going to memorize every word and like perfectly understand the grammar. That doesn't tend to go very well, because language is a natural, organic thing that's actually so complicated that if you're trying to process it all with your head in real time, it's not going to work. But learning the very basics, like this, the most common 1,000 words, it gives you a good starting point so that when you do jump into immersion, like I've been talking about, like watching a movie, you're not totally lost. You understand the basics of what's going on, and then you can continue to move forward from there.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. I mean, I would touch on the grammar and school study, because how many friends of yours where did you grow up at? Where are you from?
Portland, Oregon.
You're from Portland. Okay, cool. So you grew up in the U.S. How many friends do you have that studied a foreign language in college or high school, and maybe even grade school, that don't speak it? Right?
Yeah, I mean, most of the friends I know that have tried to learn a language, unfortunately,
Almost everybody, right?
haven't been that successful.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. And so that's just what I want to touch on with the grammar part, because generally speaking, they will give you some verb conjugations, and they'll give you some grammar, and you'll have to make sure you know the rules. And then at the end of those 4, 6 years, maybe even 8 years for some people, they could pass a test on some of the rules, but they can't speak the language at all, which seems like a travesty to me. So I'm among the same sort of method in which, for me, it was, and obviously when you're first learning your first foreign language, it's a bit chaotic, to say the least, on what you want to do. The most common words is for sure where I start, but I actually even go slightly deeper in my method. At least I would say is that the most common words for me, and you may be saying the exact same thing, but it's situational, right? I mean, if you do have a hope to learn a language, I as a footballer need to know how to say soccer ball. All right, or et cetera. These things that are going to be popping up, and I found that gives you a nice trigger in order to make sure that your subconscious gets onto it. And so that brings me to my next question, which I saw, and I haven't finished the video. An interesting video you made on and I cannot remember the name. As a matter of fact, I have it right here. Consciousness and language acquisition, which is something that I find incredibly interesting, being a lifelong meditator myself, and knowing that plays a huge role in your memory, in your ability to. It's great for sports. It's great for your emotions. It's great for everything, right? And the level of your concentration and attention is what's going to give you an ability to learn much quicker and to get deeper into your subconscious. Because I've heard you state this. Where you're at with your Japanese is a place almost like English to a certain extent, right? You don't go, all right, table. Okay, that's this. All right, great. Now I've got to skip that. Now, what's the word for the? You can't. That's not how we speak. So maybe you could just tell us what you found in that little area of the world, because I don't know that it's touched on too much in the language learning world.
Yeah, you mean meditation in particular?
Not just meditation, but possibly the subconscious, the need for the words.
I see. Yeah.
But also meditation as well. If you do, I don't know.
I mean, yeah. So, well, we could talk about meditation in a second. Yeah, but I guess to answer your question more directly, yeah, I think that basically the way that we acquire language, the way that we get to the point that you just described, in where you don't have to think about the grammar, it's just intuitive like it is for your native language, that happens through consuming comprehensible input. So this is an idea that comes from Stephen Krashen, that's known as the input hypothesis, but it basically says that there's 2 different ways that we can go about trying to gain language ability. One is the more traditional way, where you're memorizing grammar patterns and rules and things like this, and you're trying to use those consciously while you speak. But the other is to learn the way that we learned our native language, which is we just expose ourselves to the language for hundreds and thousands of hours, and before we know it, we have some amount of language ability. So it sounds like magic, and it is really kind of magical in a way, but when you think about it, that's how we all learned our native language, right? So this is something that we've all experienced at least once. And so I think that we don't lose the ability to learn in the same way that a child does. Maybe it gets a little bit harder, but if you set up the conditions correctly, you can still benefit from those mechanisms in your brain that allow you to learn language intuitively. And the key to do this is, like I said a second ago, comprehensible input. So basically, you have to receive messages in your target language that you're able to understand due to context or other factors, but still contain something that you don't know yet, right? So if I said a sentence like, "Oh, do you want to come with me to the X?" And then X, you already knew that I was going to go to the store, so then you know, okay, X means store or something, right? If you hear a sentence like that, your brain can put two and two together, and you're going to understand what I said. And so when you understand messages like this, you start to pick up information about the language on a subconscious level. And I think this is probably the most counterintuitive thing about language learning that it's really hard for people to grasp, because most of the time we're doing things with our conscious mind. And so the idea that we could actually learn subconsciously is really hard to grasp. But an example I like to use to help illustrate how important and how powerful the subconscious mind is if you're a native English speaker and I gave you the two sentences, a big red dog and a red big dog, you'll know that the first one, the big red dog, sounds more natural. But you probably don't know why this is. It just sounds right, But there's actually an underlying grammatical rule that's quite complicated. It has to do with the order of adjectives when multiple adjectives are modifying a noun. And there's a list of like, okay, age comes before color, comes before genre. There's like over 10 different factors in the list. And so if you wanted to try to use a grammar rule to produce the sentence, "a big red dog," you'd have to be running a really complicated equation in your mind. Whereas for us, we're able to do it automatically, right? We just know which one's right. When we hear someone do it wrong, we know something's wrong. And what this means is that we do know that complicated rule, just we don't know it consciously. We know it subconsciously. And we access our subconscious knowledge in the form of intuition. So to build this intuition, you need to get lots of comprehensible input, lots of exposure to the language, and lots of opportunities for your unconscious mind to figure out all the things that work. So in a way, learning language isn't that hard because you consciously don't have to do a lot of work. The hardest work you have to do is sit there and watch TV shows or listen to other people have conversations. Like I said in the beginning, it can be helpful to learn a little bit of grammar and a little bit of vocab, but the role that plays is to help make the messages more comprehensible. When you just memorize the meaning of a word, that's different than having an intuitive knowledge of how to express that idea. But when the word comes up in a TV show or conversation, you'll at least be able to go, "Oh, I remember that means table," or whatever. And then that allows you to unlock the meaning of the whole sentence. And then that can go into your subconscious and you can learn it that way. So that's kind of my underlying view of language acquisition.
Yeah. Fascinating, because and I'm not sure how you delved on that. You mentioned he's a doctor, yeah? Dr. Stephen Krashen.
Mm-hmm.
He's a doctor, right? Yeah. Okay. I stumbled across the natural approach, and I can't know when, but through a series of mistakes, of course, because you mentioned comprehensible input. And for everybody that is listening, one of the reasons I'm sure he's saying that, and one of the reasons I'm repeating this, is because if you are interested in this, do not go and listen to a thesis on Leonardo da Vinci in the toughest, the Princeton thing in Italian, and think I'm learning the language. It's like, if you can't understand, if you can't grasp the concept, you're not allowing your subconscious mind a chance to make those connections that are necessary. So, and even I see this mistake a little bit. People that try to start listening to the news a bit too early, when it's your second day of Spanish class and you're like, "I'm just going to listen to the news and like eventually I'll get it." And it's tougher than you might think. And so, making sure that you have things on that in the correct area, I think is huge. But,
yeah. I mean, I think there's two different factors that a lot of times are opposing, and one of them is comprehensibility. You need to be listening to things that are comprehensible. If it's completely incomprehensible, you can't learn anything from it. But on the other hand, you have to find something that interests you, right? Because like we were talking about, language learning is ultimately fueled by passion for the language. So a lot of times the only things that are perfectly comprehensible at the beginning are things like children's shows. But those are really boring, right? A lot of times if you just try to sit down and watch Dora the Explorer for 2 hours as an adult, you're going to lose your mind. So sometimes you got to kind of find the right balance between comprehensibility and enjoyment. And I find that even if it's above your level, if you're really interested in it and you have the passion for it, you're willing to look a lot of things up and go really slowly, then it can work. So you got to kind of find what works for you.
Sure, sure, sure. Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, yeah, you do definitely have a lot more work to do if you're going to sit down and watch the 5 o'clock news and it's your second day, because you're going to have to look up a whole lot of words before you understand it. But you're 100% right. The more interested you are, the better. But you wanted to touch on meditation. So what's your stance there?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't think meditation is absolutely necessary for language learning or anything. Lots of people learn a language who don't meditate, but I definitely think it can help, largely in the same ways that it would help any endeavor, like you mentioned, right? Meditation, a lot of depending on what type of practice you're doing, is a really direct way to train your ability to concentrate. And yeah, the greater your ability to concentrate and focus, then the greater your ability is going to be to learn anything. But I think there's also some other benefits unique or benefits of meditation that apply uniquely to language learning. One, which is what I call the ability to tolerate ambiguity. So, as adults, we're used to understanding almost everything in our environment, right? And we're actually taught in school, to not go on to the next lesson until you fully master the first lesson. So a lot of people have this mindset instilled with them, but that actually gets in the way when they're trying to learn a language, because you're not going to understand everything in the language from day one, right? Even if you try to find something that's really comprehensible, there's still going to be stuff that doesn't quite make sense, and it's going to take a long time for some of these aspects of the language to really click. And so it's really crucial to have the ability to be okay with not understanding and to kind of focus on the stuff that you do understand. Kind of like a child, right? A child can watch a TV show meant for adults, have most of the plot go over his head, but they're still really interested because they're just looking at the facial expressions of people and the little bits and pieces that they do get. And so I think it's important to be able to get back into this kind of beginner's mind, this kind of childlike mindset where it's okay that you're not picking up every little detail. You're just happy to pick up what you are going to pick up, because if you try to hold yourself to the standard of perfectly understanding everything, you're just not going to get anywhere, because it's not possible to understand everything until you're much further down the line. So I think meditation can help us let go of this attachment that we have to needing to understand everything, and it can allow us to go with the flow a little more.
Totally. I mean, just to bounce off the example that you gave, I think in 2013 or 14, I think 2014, I was playing in Baku, Azerbaijan. I played there for about 2.5 years, and I made the decision because I'd already played in Croatia, so I had a base in Slavic languages, to learn Russian because it's a former Soviet Union country. And so there was a show called Kukhnya, which is massively popular across the entire Russian speaking world. But I, of course, could not really understand a whole lot. But I could follow the plot and follow things. I knew enough. I know what a knife is. They're in the kitchen a lot. I figure out you have situational awareness for stuff like that. And you can fast forward to now when I'm catching all these subtle conversations and all these other hints. And it's actually kind of like a reward to have been able to just let my mind go and just kind of follow along, catch what I can catch. And then later it's like watching a whole new series, because this time I understand that conversation and I understand a little bit more, and you understand more and more. And so it's actually really great. So I think, yeah, you're right. It's a part of meditation that I've never really touched on, because usually letting go of attachments and things like that is more in the realm of emotions and forgiving someone that smacked you when you were in third grade or whatever it is. But cool. So if we take this on further, I don't even think I've asked you. Obviously, you've achieved what you've needed to achieve in Japanese to a certain degree, and I know it never ends really. But what is coming after, or what did you do before, and what other languages do you speak, or would you say you have any sort of fundamental knowledge in?
Yeah, I mean, I've dabbled with Mandarin quite a bit, and there's a lot of overlap between Japanese and Chinese. So I have a leg up in that area. And also, for anyone who doesn't know anything about Japanese, Japanese is actually written with a combination of three different written scripts, one of the three being Chinese characters. So I already knew a lot of written Chinese just from Japanese. So that also made me really interested in it, because I wanted to kind of learn the language where these characters originally came from. And also there's so much, historical relationship with stuff between China. So I've always been really interested in that. So I do continue to dabble in Chinese, but still for me, I always come back to wanting to get my Japanese even better. I'm never satisfied. And especially now, I'm kind of thinking of potentially starting a new YouTube channel where I would target a Japanese audience. So it just comes back to I want to be as good as possible. Like in a way, when we're learning a language, we're at the beginning, we're focused on just building basic competency, right? Understanding, being able to express ourselves. But you can take it further if you want it and get to the point where you're for example, for me in English, right? When I started making YouTube videos, I started to try to work on my English speaking because I wanted to look confident on camera and sound articulate. And I think I've improved a lot just through practice and through paying attention to how other people speak. And so even native speakers, they're not all the same level, right? There's a huge range in language ability in different areas of language. So maybe I can speak Japanese like a Japanese person who's not the most articulate, but I want to be able to speak Japanese like a person, like a Japanese person who's articulate. You know, it's like I don't want to be like at the baseline of what it means to be a native. I want to be in the high range of what it means to be a native. So I still feel like there's a lot of improvement that I can make. And ultimately for me, because Japanese is such a big part of my life, the more that I improve in it, the more that my experience of spending time with Japanese becomes enriched. So I always feel like I'm getting continued value from it. So for me, it's kind of like my first love that I always keep coming back to.
That's dope. That's dope because yeah, there is just this this feeling that once you become fluent, it doesn't mean that you're articulate, right? There's obviously a massive, and it reminds me of something that I saw just the other day. I can't remember the exact quote, but it got me to think about the fact that readers are not the same, and I don't know why I didn't think about that, but because if you, I mean, the way Earth or human life, wherever this is, the way reality seems to work is that the more you do a thing, and the more you do a thing with intense, devoted energy, focused attention, the better you get at it, no matter what it is. If I just want to bounce a ball off of the floor over and over again, I can be the best ball floor bouncer ever. And so it got me thinking about reading, and I read quite a bit, and I've always enjoyed it. But it just got me thinking that there are people who aren't not just fast readers because it's not about speed, but it's comprehension, and then from comprehension goes into also application of that knowledge. And so there's these levels that you can just go in everything that just kind of make things really really cool. But
Yeah,
for me, I
totally.
just want to okay, I just wanted to throw out for all these. I have not obviously Chinese, Japanese, and I've heard this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard somewhere that Japanese is one of the easier languages for native English speakers for some reason that I don't know. Is that correct?
Japanese?
As opposed to Chinese and say these Southeast Asian languages.
I
Is
don't
that
think
not
so. I
true?
think Japanese
No?
is like as hard as it gets, to be honest. I mean,
Do you think
Chinese is really
Japanese?
hard too, but I think
Okay.
Japanese, Chinese, Korean, I think they're all in the same domain of being quite difficult for an English speaker.
Oh no, that much I mean. I meant in regards to each other, in regards to Japanese, the Thai, and maybe Vietnamese stuff like that. I heard that Japanese was possibly some rules or some grammatical things were going to help us, or maybe that somebody in the article just being like very hopeful.
I mean, well, it depends on what you mean by difficulty too. One thing that makes Japanese perhaps easier to learn is that there's a lot of resources. There's a ton of resources because learning Japanese is popular, and the type of people who want to learn Japanese also like to make resources and programs and software. So the Japanese community is the most spoiled language learning community from a resource angle, and that's pretty important, right? Like Vietnamese, that's probably going to be really hard to learn just for the reason that there's almost no resources, right? There's probably few textbooks, few like flashcard decks,
Quality
software
ones
and stuff.
too, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's probably the real challenge, right? So languages like Thai, Vietnamese, or Cantonese, probably lack of resources does make it practically speaking very difficult. But in terms of just the language itself, I mean, Japanese is really hard because the word order is completely different from English. That we say "I love you," they say "I you love." The verb comes at the end, so that's a totally different way of thinking. And I mean, the pronunciation, that's another kind of interesting way to think about hard or difficulty, hard versus easy. Chinese pronunciation is hard in the sense that if you don't nail the tones, for example, then you're not even going to be understood. You could go try to order something at a restaurant and they're going to be like, huh? So you could say the pronunciation is hard. In Japanese, you could have like pretty crappy pronunciation, and they'll still understand you. So in that sense, it's easy. But if you want to sound like a native, it's actually really hard because there's this thing called pitch accent that is really hard for native speakers.
Okay. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I've seen some. I've seen some of your videos there that have that pitch accent, and I was wondering if that had something to do with all languages or what the thing was. But okay, so that's cool. That has to do with that. Well, yeah. Then I don't know where my true deep dive into an Asian language will be. There was talks of me kind of doing something with a company that was going to be going to the Olympics in Japan, and we are going to do some sort of 3 month Japanese learning language experience. You know, it kind of, and it didn't work out, but I'm not sure where I'll go with that. But in closing, is there anything also? All right, let me just go this before, because I'm also still curious. When you first started, and to where you are now, were you making any videos? What were your conversations like at the very, very, very beginning from your videos? And has this entire thing changed you and changed the way? Because if you're getting ready to start a Japanese YouTube channel, let's say, for instance, do you look back at those videos and go, oh my God, who's this guy? Do you like, what's that transformation been like for you?
Yeah, well, so I mean, I really started making videos in probably 2015, and this was when basically there just wasn't a lot of people talking about the specific method of learning Japanese that I had used, and so I was like, hey, maybe there's a couple other people out there trying to do the same thing, so I'll share the kind of tips and tricks that I've figured out through just trial and error and doing this for so long. So I never thought that many people would view them, and I didn't put a lot of effort into them. And so, like, when I watch those videos now, there's some of them that actually the content is pretty solid, but just like the way that I talk, it really makes me cringe, because I'm like, I can't speak clearly. I'm like mumbling. It sounds like I mean, the mic quality is really bad, but it's not even just that. It's like I'm talking like this.
Right, exactly.
So like, and luckily I didn't show my face. It's just my voice on those old videos. I would like put stuff on the screen, so I probably would be even worse if you could see my voice. But I mean, yeah, I mean throughout there's a lot of videos I removed, honestly, because I completely disagree with what I said in them now, or just the attitude I had. When I first started, I had a very elitist attitude where I thought, you know, everyone should be like me, and if you're not going to try to do like what I did, then, you know, you're wrong, or you know. So a lot of people, I got a lot of hate for that, and some people still associate that with me. So over time, I've gotten more kind of open-minded and more just welcoming of other perspectives. So I think definitely some of my older videos, yeah, they're definitely hard to watch now.
I mean, yeah, that's what happens. It's a cool thing to see the evolution, and I mean, it's the same thing. You have to work on your speaking. I mean, we're both native English speakers, and this conversation, given that I've been doing YouTube technically for about, I think we're in our 5th year, maybe it's 4 or 5 years, let's say, and my ability to convey the ideas that I have come off much clearer. And these conversations, I think it's the viewer that gets the benefit of someone being articulate. It's not necessarily that, oh, you sound smart. Did he use the word articulate and elegant? It's because the ability to convey an idea, if you can do so in an incredibly simple manner, will allow someone, I think, to take that information and use it easier. And that's kind of what we do on our football channel, is try to break down these complex concepts into very, very, very simple ways in order for you to do that. And I think obviously that's probably your goal, essentially, with trying to get someone to start their journey with 100 days of fluency and whatnot. So why don't you tell people where they can find the best stuff from Matt vs. Japan?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I have my YouTube channel, Matt vs. Japan. I'm also on Twitter, same thing, Matt vs. Japan. And then yeah, my website is Refold. The URL is refold.la. But if you just Google Refold, it should come up first thing. And then on there, I have pretty detailed guides to how to apply all the ideas that I've been talking about in a systematic strategy.
All right, well, awesome. Guys, that stuff is right down below in the description. Go ahead and check Matt out if you are checking this out on YouTube. And with that, Matt, we'll just have to, oh, you know what? I should know how to say the word table in Japanese, since we mentioned it a whole bunch. How do you say table in Japanese?
So this is actually kind of ironic, but it's actually teiburu.
Teiburu.
It's an English loan word.
Ah, there we go. All right. So everybody's learned it. You're welcome, people. All right, Matt, thanks for being here, man. And we'll have you back on soon, man.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was fun.